Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot. I'm Diana Ideas, Master Certified Coach, and this video takes you behind the scenes for card 18, Scarcity. So with the scarcity card, we have a pairing of scarcity and abundance because in the major arcana of tarot, we have a pairing of the moon and the sun together. So the challenge here is that scarcity is not meant to be a bad or negative card. And as we look at scarcity from a business context, it absolutely can be leveraged, it can bring people in. But the idea of the scarcity card, as you see the figure who's downtrodden and focused on kind of what isn't the case. But you see, there's a lot of light in this card. Or if we think about the moon, or in this case, the planet that's in the middle of this card, just because we can't see the moon doesn't mean that it's not there. So there's so much abundance in this card, an abundance of stars, an abundance of sand, an abundance of light. But at the same time, with the focus is on the darkness. And so in the moon, we have that limited light and darkness. Not everything is what it seems. What is our intuition telling us? There can be kind of that sense of illusion. So this is a complex pull. In my opinion, it's a very beautiful card. It's one of my favorite in the deck. It's not one of my favorite to pull in the deck. It has some complex feelings and emotions that go with it. So the quote associated with the scarcity card is, "There's no scarcity of opportunity to make a living at what you love. There's only scarcity of resolve to make it happen." So again, kind of looking at scarcity in that different way and looking at how are we enacting this? How do our beliefs and intuition and our movement forward, how is that impacted? So again, this calls to the moon card in the major arcana and tarot. I'll talk a little bit more about this as we dig more into the deck. Speaking of decks, one of my favorites is the Otherkin Tarot by Siolo Thompson. And she says the moon represents those dark moments when fears and insecurities are loudest in your head. Take heart, though, you can emerge from this valley of shadows, and often it is these exact moments that lead to the greatest breakthroughs. So there's that sense of something more, sense of something learning from this, even though these can be some more kind of disillusioning and character building moments in that entrepreneur or in that reluctant entrepreneur journey. So as we think about the scarcity card, which is associated with the moon, the high priestess also comes to mind, which in this deck is mapped with intuition. So these cards are very much linked. So they're linked as you look at the traditional cards. They have the bars, they have water, they both have the moon in them. The idea of the high priestess is that she has a knowledge and a depth and kind of a mystery. She doesn't necessarily explain herself. She's a very intuitive character, and there's a more kind of darker, divine feminine associated quality. So the thing is, I was just reading a book about the moon, and the author talked about the moon. You don't have enough information. The moon reveals herself only when she's ready to reveal. So we have that kind of divine feminine, that dark, that intuitive sense. So there's a link between the moon and the high priestess. And so there may also be a link between scarcity and intuition. Are you getting hints about scarcity? Are you getting a sense of how to leverage scarcity? So my kind of challenge here, because the moon, there's no bad cards in tarot. There's difficult cards to pull. This one definitely makes me pause and wince a little bit sometimes, but it also means that there's something else there. There's something to be revealed. And that's very correlated with our intuition. We don't necessarily understand what's happening. We don't necessarily have the answers yet, related to the quote as well. The idea that more will be revealed in time, but it's that kind of bearing through it. The idea that the moon cycles their seasons. How are you going to move through this particular season or cycle, knowing that it may be darker or colder, or you may not feel as much hope. What follows this card is abundance, but we have to get through the season to go on to the next season. So, more about scarcity from a reluctant entrepreneur perspective. Questions to consider. How is scarcity serving you? So, not just looking at it as a bad thing, but looking at it as a business tactic, limited option, available, waiting list, things like that. There are definitely ways that they can feed into your business and support your business success. How are you leveraging cycles or fighting against them? So there can be a way that we have an expectation that everything's great all the time, but we know in business there is that feast and famine, there is that cycle, the moon cycles, the ocean cycles, the season cycle. There is a way as humans, we are always trying not to cycle and be consistent and the same. So one of the things to consider from a scarcity perspective or a moon perspective is if scarcity is part of the cycle, if this down is part of you going back up, how are you leveraging that versus just fighting against it? With limited light, what is revealed? So the idea of the shadow, the darkness, the intuitive side, the things that aren't necessarily rational or understood, what information are dreams or intuition or tarot cards or other sources providing to you? And then what is influencing you or your business that you may not be in control or aware of? So one of the things people may not believe, one thing I say is people may not believe in the moon, but the ocean does. So the moon is moving around the water inside us on the earth. And so whether or not that's something you buy into, we do have that cycle of the seasons. There is that cycle of the tide. So there are influences in your business that you're not necessarily in control of or aware of. So part of that awareness and looking into that more kind of intuitive side or the more kind of divine feminine side or the darker side is seeing, how can you actually leverage that so it's not just happening to you, but you are using it for good. As far as listening, Cam's Burning House is the song that I associate with this card. So first of all, the song takes place in a dream. I had a dream about a burning house. You were stuck inside. I couldn't get you out. So there's that kind of feeling of scarcity, that feeling of being trapped. Love isn't all that it seems. I've been sleepwalking, wandering all night, trying to take what's lost and broke and make it right. So there's that sense of that brokenness. You see the character with the head down, too close to the fire, but it's the only place I can hold you tight in this burning house. So that sense of being trapped, and at the same time, there's that tightness, there's that constriction, which I think often scarcity in contrast to abundance can make us feel. The podcast episode associated with this is season 18, Tarot. And so as we move through the entrepreneurial concepts on the Reluctant Entrepreneur of Cross Street Coaching, I actually drew the tarot card. I drew the scarcity card for December. And so had that same kind of like, ooh, what does this mean reaction to it? So Jason and I talked through the tarot deck and how it developed, and it's the last episode of that particular season. So in the spirit of that draw, though, because I was planning to make videos, so that was Q4 of 2022. I talk about the executive dashboard, then my October, November, and December draw. And so I talk a little bit about these in that podcast episode, but the idea is that I like to draw one card at a time. I draw one for the quarter. Okay, so looking at executive dashboard makes sense. Q4, let me get my kind of P's and Q's in order. Let me understand my revenue and where my revenue is coming from so that I'm wrapping up the year successfully and looking at the next year. October did give a lot of perspective that year. It was the first time my team got together in person because we're spread out all over the country. And so it was a beautiful thing to bring us together to look at how we could be better as a team, what products we could look at. November was a lot about partnership. So moving forward from that perspective and from those relationships, what structures were we putting in place? How are we partnering? Jason was working with me on the cards and the deck and the podcast. But then December, drawing the scarcity, this one was it's scary. It's kind of that Scarcity. It can be a challenging draw, but at the same time, December tended to be when I got the most kind of late December and into January. One of my biggest clients had one of their biggest projects. So I definitely had that scarcity of time. And also looking at, okay, how am I looking at this as a business owner as I had into the next year. And 2023 was actually a very strong year, but in contrast to 2022, which had so much abundance and so much going on, it did feel like a little bit of a constriction. So in some ways, that was also a preview to what was coming up. It was different, not wrong, but it had some changes, it had some new challenges. But scarcity can be a hard draw. So these cards I pulled one at a time in the month. So, at the beginning of the quarter, I pull it for the quarter and then pull it for the month. And then over time, skipping forward to 2024, with my team at the end of 2023, we all chose a card for ourselves. And so I chose a serial entrepreneur because I was looking at making new products and a lot of things going on and kind of new innovations. When I got into 2024 itself, I drew scarcity. I was like, oh man, as my theme for the year, I would much rather have the serial entrepreneur than have scarcity be my theme for the year. And I had just been talking to someone about scarcity. I had actually had someone with me right before I pulled the scarcity card. So I was like, well, maybe that's not it. Maybe I'm still kind of involved in the energy of that other person. So I actually switched decks because I have more than one copy of this deck. And I was like, okay, tarot cards, what's my theme for 2024? Boom, scarcity. So this is part of the reason, as I talk about, if you're more familiar with tarot, you may do spreads and multiple cards and things like that, but my cards tend to repeat themselves. So this was a challenge. It was a challenge this was the first time I actually drew cards at the beginning of the year. And then when I kept going and I had scarcity at the 2024 theme, and for Q1, I picked closure, which is the death card. Q2, I picked closure again, which was a death card. Q3 was balance, so that felt a little bit lighter, right? The balance is you're making it through some of the darkness. And then Q4 was sales, which makes sense because after all that scarcity and closure, I would need to do more sales. And hopefully the scarcity and closure, if that meant less work or less relationships, hopefully it meant work-life balance. So I'm recording this video at the end of 2024. So I did survive, but I will record a separate video about how in 2024 I drew cards at the beginning of the year, and these were the ones I drew for the quarters. I'll share the ones I drew for the months as well. And then within the quarter and within the month, I drew cards as well. So I'll make a separate video about that. But for me, this was hard. If it had been a really kind of nice, fun, abundant, light, bright draw. There's no bad cards in tarot, but at the same time, the moon, not everything is what it seems. Scarcity and closure. That was a pretty rough kind of looking at the first two quarters of the year. So that was a little bit more challenging to me. So I don't think I'm going to do that again for 2025. I think I'm going to go back to my normal style of drawing a card kind of as I go for the quarter and the month, as opposed to previewing out the whole year, because it was hard to have a preview that was so dark, frankly, and not really know what to do with it. So I just offer that up. At the same time, though, scarcity, it's not what it seems. And there were important lessons and important things happening this year that maybe I don't even fully see or understand yet. This was a lower kind of point in the cycle for me and my business. But at the same time, as I moved through it, we'll see kind of what yields from that, which may and more than likely put me in an even better place. So TBD on that, but just playing with, because scarcity was such a dominant theme for 2024. And I wanted to make the video for scarcity and also give a preview on different ways you can pull cards. So check us out at reluctantentrepreneur.tarot.com. Also on Insta, Tiffany makes weekly videos. So check those out. On the website, you can read the descriptions, the questions, link to the podcast episodes, watch these videos, and then also purchase a deck. So thanks so much for your support and wishing you a happy new year and success moving forward.